Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you planned out today. Very excited. We're going to be starting with coaching. But before we get into anything, I want to remind everybody hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, do all that good stuff so you get your email in the mornings that we go live, which is, of course, every day. Now, if you have any thoughts or questions while we're talking, by all means, put them in the comment section and we can get to them directly. New face, Sarah, great to see you. Great to have you on here. Very excited. Steve, good to see you as well. Shaun, always good to have you on. Matt will be joining us when he is able. Right there. Boom. Look at that. Matt, how you doing? Good to go. He's with
Right,
us.
right. Let's do
There we
it.
go. He's in. So before we go too deep in anything, Sarah, you're a new face.
Hi,
Give
Sarah.
us 30, 45 seconds on who you are, where you come from, all that good stuff.
Yeah, awesome. My name's Sarah. Thank you guys so much for having me. I'm currently out of the Dallas, Texas area. I train jujitsu with Alan Jabaro, and so that's how I got connected with you guys. Army veteran. I did 8 years active duty before switching over to the medical field where I am now, and I've been coaching since 2015 in and out of CrossFit gyms, online platforms, and currently providing programming at our jujitsu gym here in McKinney.
Outstanding. Looking forward to the convo. This is going to be good. And just to point something out there, Shaun, she was an engineer too.
Nice, nice.
You're outnumbered now. We got 3-1. We'll see what happens. So we're gonna get into coaching 101. This is the big one. Now, just to remind everybody, look at that, Daniel. Greetings, Daniel. Been too long. It really has been. Good to see you. So if you guys have any comments or questions, put them up there, and we will get to them as we go. Coaching 101. So let's talk about this. I have a quick little blurb on what coaching is, and then I want you to get your guys' opinion on it right off the bat. So it says, put simply, coaching is a process that aims to improve performance and focuses on the here and now rather than on the distant past or future. While there are many different models of coaching, here we're not considering the coach as an expert, but instead the coach as a facilitator of learning, which is an interesting point of view on it. And it says there is a huge difference between teaching someone and helping them learn. In coaching, fundamentally, the coach is helping the individual to improve their own performance. In other words, helping them to learn. So that's a very initial piece on it. Well, let's go around the table. Sarah, I'm going to come to you first. What are your thoughts on what coaching is, and what that on that definition there? What do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think coaching is very much an art and should be centered on the human connection. And that is how we achieve holistic, long lasting results with our clients.
I like that. Steve, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's bang on. And what I love about what I love about what you read was the idea of coaching being in the here and the now. Like my experience of coaching, I've been coaching mountain biking for a long time, and I can't think that there's a lot of activities that where you're right immersed in it. Mountain biking is definitely near the top of that list, just as jujitsu is. Like you have to be working with somebody who's fully immersed in the minute. Um, and that to me rings very true. I love what Sarah said too about the idea of holistic, right? Like what I really get a kick out of when I'm coaching people is making that connection with them and getting to know who they are as a human so that I can help them become better humans as well as better at what they are, well, what I'm specifically coaching them in. But I definitely think it's a holistic package deal. Fires me up.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt,
Agreed.
what do you think?
Yeah, definitely the holistic side of the house. Like you can address one issue or one problem or one concern that the individual has, but if you actually don't take a look at everything and find out what the why is, why you want this or why you're looking to develop and grow, you will not get the entire issue under control or solved, right? Where if you do get into more of the holistic, the whole thing, then that is more beneficial for the person as well. Being in the moment, yeah, the individual has to actually be slowing down enough that they realize they're in this moment, this second, before you can actually really get through to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Shaun, want to round us off?
Sure. Initial thoughts on coaching are it all depends on who's in front of you, whether it's a person or a team or a brigade, whether it's a one dimensional task or a multifaceted task, whether it requires in the now or whether it requires the strategy of how to dominate at a world championship for 0.75 years from now. coaching is many things. It's psychological, it's physiological, it's emotional, and it's not just coaching the person, it's coaching generations from now through that person. And so coaching is a lot of things. So coaching 101, maybe we won't get into all of that complexity and nuance because it's called 101. But my initial statement based on the decades of coaching that I've done is this: coaching is many things to many people, and maybe that's a good place to start.
I think it's a great place to start. Anybody got any thoughts on it? Sarah, actually, I'm going to come back to you right away. Any thoughts on anything that's been said so far?
Yeah, no, I think that's so accurate. I really like what he was just saying too, just about that you have to really take into consideration who your audience is when you're coaching, right? Because the way you approach a team is going to be different than how you approach an individual, or if you're coaching on the corporate side for organizational performance versus athletic performance. And so I think it's important as a coach to have the humility to know what you're looking at and if that's in your scope or if you need to phone a friend. So I think that's a really important acknowledgement.
I like that a lot. Steve, I'm going to...
Yeah, I totally agree with what Sarah just said. I mean, I grew up a gymnast, okay? So I was, from the time I was 7 till I was 13, I mean, I was 6 days a week, 3 hours a day. And I was a hard person to coach because I tend to be relatively in my own head, like in my head mentally and emotionally. I really have a lot of appreciation for coaches I worked with in the past, trying to connect with me as an individual, as well as keep the entire program moving in a team sense forward. But the phoning a friend piece, I think that is a really interesting part, because if you are not the right coach for the right person at the right time, I think that there's a lot more damage can be done without recognizing that. I think that understanding where the limitations lie and saying, you know what, this is out of my depth, I need a little bit of help to get this person moved along. I think having the humility and the ability to recognize that is a really critical piece of coaching. And I phone a friend often if I can't help somebody have a breakthrough.
It's interesting. Matt, you got any points to add?
No, I like that, the phone a friend thing. And you're right in the fact that there's, with coaching, you can also like be thought as like instructing and teaching, and how different they are too as well. We're like instructing, you're just like feeding them, like, here, do this, do this, do this. I'll see you in a week, peace out. We're teaching, you're actually you're involved more in their learning process versus just send and deliver. No, I really like that point you made.
Indeed. And Shaun, I'm going to come back to you one last time. Anything to tweak on that before I get into the question I got?
Yeah, sure. The discussion brought up the topic of team, delivering to a team versus delivering to an individual. But let's stir that soup bowl even a little bit more and think about delivering to the individual in front of a team, or delivering to the team as a message to the individual. Coaching is complex. Coaching is nuanced. Coaching is done well when sometimes it isn't visible. And so there's lots of things to talk about coaching 101. Again, maybe if today we don't focus on all of the tips and tricks on how to make the perfect athlete, maybe we just talk about the broadness.
Absolutely. The broadness. I like it. So my first thought on this is, what I wanted to actually ask about is, now that we know what coaching is being coachable, right? And understanding, because that's where it really stems from, is your own ability to be coached, at least in my mind. And I'm wondering what it is you guys think of are, those pieces in yourself that make you coachable or make you uncoachable in those moments. You know what I mean? So, Matt, I'm going to come to you first. What do you think?
Oh, 100%. I mean, and that also, there's a lot of people that I've said, hey, I can help you with this, and let's work out through this problem. And they're like, no, and they're just gonna dismiss you, and you have to stand back. And it's not like disregard stand back. It's just you take a step back, you pause, and you just watch them, and then they'll look over to you and be like, hey, maybe I do need assistance. So you're right. There's a lot of give and take between the coach and the coacheed. So It's difficult to navigate sometimes, but it is something that is a skill that gets learned on both sides.
Absolutely. Sarah, you got any thoughts on being coachable?
Yeah, I think that you just have to be in that mind of being that lifelong learner and open to feedback. I think it's important for a coach to be coachable, because if you close yourself off from feedback, how can you expect your client to be open to feedback, right? So you have to be the mirror of what you're asking for and have that level of transparency.
Absolutely. Steve, I'm getting comments on the side here, but what
Yeah.
are your thoughts on being coached?
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, I think what Sarah just said is bang on. Like, even the idea of doing a demonstration of something that's quite technical. Like, in my world, if I'm riding a very technical line and I'm doing it as a demonstration for my clients, I'll acknowledge the fact that this may take me a couple rips to get through, because I may not execute on it as well as I want to the first time. And what that does is opens them up to the idea that if coach needs a couple tries, then it's going to be very okay for me to take 10 tries, because it's about the actual execution of it with purpose and skill, as opposed to just making it look good. You know what I mean? And I think there's a clear line between those two things. And coming back to Shaun's point, which I really like about overarching, is what that does, it sets a tone with your group about what the philosophy and mentality of the group is going to be during the coaching process. And once that tone is set, then the athletes almost start to coach each other, because there's a willingness to fail and there's a willingness to critique without there being fear of like it being real criticism. It's like, no, this is what we saw that was wrong. It has nothing to do with who you are as a person. This is how we get better, by opening ourselves up to this. So I think it's a melding of those two things.
I like that a lot. Shaun, any points on that?
Yeah. So I'm thinking of Sarah right now. You're living in Texas, down McKinney Way, right? We lived in Texas for 2 years in Sugar Land. And when I was down there, it's actually when I started coaching high performance athletes in mountain biking and road racing through the Sugar Land Houston crew, and racing for Specialized for 2 years in Texas. So as part of that process, we just moved from Canada down to Sugar Land, and believe it or not, culturally it's a bit different.
Yeah.
So one of the aspects of being a coach is having the fluidity, or the chameleon-like ability to match the culture that you're stepping into, rather than stepping into any culture and turning it into your culture. As a coach, you've got to have the nuance or the sensitivity to step into a moment, realize what the moment feels like, what the culture of that moment is, and then adjust your coaching style so that you're getting maximum uptake. In other words, what I'm saying is, I have a coaching style, but I can't deploy that at a 10 out of 10 throughout the entire world for every single person. I'm going to manipulate my coaching style based on the vibe that I'm getting in the moment. Now, that's not to say if the person or the team or the brigade that's standing in front of me has a vibe that I don't like, and therefore I'm going to smash it into oblivion and I'm going to rebuild it in the form of how I like things to be. What I am saying is, you've got to step in as a coach, you've got to feel what's in front of you, and then you've got to start calibrating it according to the vibe or the culture, so that your idealized outcome that you have in your mind as a coach is you're heading in the right direction with that individual or individuals. And so I think I want to be careful and say that as a coach, it is a two-way highway, but you're there to coach, not there to be a best friend. And so you can be a best friend, and I might be the best friend to some of my athletes. Or the athletes that I used to coach. I don't know, but I consider some of them as some of my best friends. And so, as a coach, you're not there to be a best friend. You're there to be a coach. And by saying that, what I mean is, I have expectations, and they could be my bestest of best friends. And if they're not meeting my expectations, then they're going to get a recalibration from me as their coach. And so I really, really want to be clear in that when we're talking about culture or adjusting to the vibe, etc., I'm not suggesting that you completely flip your script and be inauthentic as a coach.
That brings up a great point. Steve, you had mentioned earlier about being relatable, and that I think that there's could be an expansion on that quite a bit, especially with what Shaun was just saying. You want to dive into that concept being relatable, but at least somewhat not unaccessible, but still above. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I think that's where we come into this concept of self, right? Like before I can be in front of a group of, whether it's kids I'm coaching at the high school or whether it's a group of adults that I'm working with in the mountain bike program, I have to be squared away. And that initial contact that somebody has with me, um, the word I come to over the years is professional. Like I take my job as a coach quite seriously. These people have paid a considerable sum of money to come to Whistler to ride in the bike park. They've trusted us with their money. And so I should be able to provide for them the service that they expect. And that means I'm squared away. Not only am I squared away physically, I'm squared away mentally, emotionally. My equipment is squared away so that I'm there in service of them. And I think that's where relatability can start to be built, is that if somebody trusts me enough to actually give me the opportunity to coach them, I am going to deliver on that. I'm not going to come up short. Now, with that, like Sarah alluded to earlier, the idea of transparency, I always say to people right in the first day of working with them, if I explain something to you in a way that doesn't make sense to you, please ask me and tell me that it doesn't make sense, or ask me to explain it in a different way, and I will execute. I actually ended up coaching a retired Marine this last, like literally less than a month ago. And on day 2, he said, cut the shit. Sorry, pardon my language. He said, just tell me where I suck and tell me how to get better. Because he was raised in the Marine Corps for 20 years. He was a fighter pilot in the Marines. And all he knew how to respond to was cutthroat feedback. Tell me what sucks and I'll make it better if you tell me how. And so that, like, my style had to pivot and shift to be ruthless with this guy. And he loved it. He ate it up. Whereas in the very same group, I had a neurosurgeon from Toronto who was very delicate and relatively fragile. So while I'm coaching with cutthroat over here, I'm immediately having to provide feedback to the next person executing on the skill with a whole different tact. So by me being squared away, I feel like everybody was able to relate to me relatively well because they knew what to expect from me. And I was able to make those pivots, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarah, any thoughts on that?
No, I think those are such great points, but I think it is really important to understand that, what he was saying is that, having that line to establish that position of authority and as a leader in that situation versus crossing that line and getting confused with that friendship or that interpersonal relationship. Because at the end of the day, just as you were saying, like, people pay you for this service, and coaching is a position of service, and it's important to be able to honor both of those things.
Absolutely. Matt, anything to add?
No, that's pretty much, yeah. Like you have to have that solid line between professionalism and being that friend, right? In the health coaching realm, it's more of an accountability aspect of things, right? Like I'll be your coach, we'll be friendly, we'll be chit chatting, but when I need to call you on your lack of stuff, I mean, I will call you on it and keep you on it. And if that requires me texting you every 20 minutes saying, put down the fork, don't eat the cake, then I'll text you every 20 minutes, put down the fork, don't eat the cake, right? It may be harsh for somebody, and exactly like Steve was saying about some people need that hard, like, tell me what's wrong and I'll fix it. Okay, well, I'm going to tell you every 20 minutes what's going on wrong. But it is that balance between that professionalism, friendliness, and then anything in between.
Absolutely. Shaun, you got any additions to that?
Yeah, as a coach, I think I've always represented professional approach. And I want to help everyone understand that that's a two-way highway. The athlete, irrespective of how old they are or what their experience level is or what their visualized outcomes are, it's almost unimportant to me. The moment that we handshake, either virtually or in real time out there in the 3D world, if we're handshaking on "you're now my coach," my next thought is you're now a professional and you'll act accordingly. And I don't think there's ever been a time with any athlete that I've worked with where I haven't said, all right, now you're not an amateur anymore. As of now, you're a professional. Start thinking like one, start acting like one. And I don't care whether the person's paying me or not. If I'm involved with someone in any capacity, I expect them to act like a professional. That means show up in the right dress. That means show up early, meeting your timings. That means ... All of the things that we were taught in the military, those are all the things that I expect from my athletes or anyone that I work with, whether they're paying me or not. It's the difference between an amateur mindset and a professional mindset. And I think a lot of people misunderstand professionalism in the sense of, well, I can't be a professional if I'm not a professional athlete. A professional athlete is someone who typically gets paid, but not always gets paid, though a lot of people represent themselves as, professional athletes. I don't think it's about the money, it's about the position that you hold and how you're reflecting your professionalism out there into the world. And as a coach, I'm responsible to teach someone to become a professional. That isn't something that they should learn by themselves through happenstance. 4.5 years of coaching later, they learn about it in a movie. That is not how I'm supposed to create a relationship with someone. I'm supposed to be making them more professional. And so I start on that right from the first second.
That you do. You've done it with me many times. And so I kind of wanted to get into this because it's almost like a chicken and egg kind of thing for me in my head a little bit, in terms of leadership and coaching, right? Because it's kind of along the same lines, but it's not at the same time, if you guys are following what I'm getting at. So I'm wondering what your guys' thoughts are on the difference, because in order to be a coach, you have to be a leader, but in order to be a leader, you don't have to be a coach. It's kind of a weird juxtaposition. But Sarah, I'm going to come to you first. What do you think of the differences are between them?
Oh man, that's so hard because I completely agree with you. I feel like they're so intertwined. I think it really comes down to, as a leader though, you have just a higher level of liability, and the decision making I think is higher. When you have to, in a leadership role, I just imagine the responsibility of, at the end of the day, having to sometimes make these unilateral decisions that have high consequence. Versus as a coach, I think you have an opportunity to dialogue a lot more. And not to say that you can't in a leadership position, but I feel like coaching is a more fluid space where it's a little bit safer. You're still looking for, a high-end result, but I think there's a little bit less that goes into it. But there's more of an interpersonal dynamic in coaching that makes you more successful. As where if you have some hard edges as a leader, I think those are a little bit easier to write off and kind of get away with. But if you do that as a coach, likely, you won't be sought after, or you won't have that relatability to the clients that, all of us have discussed previously.
That's an interesting point. Steve, thoughts?
Yeah, I feel that connection so strongly that many years ago, I just accepted the leadership role in my coaching because I felt like I couldn't really separate them. Mostly because in the early parts of my teaching career, I was working with groups of youth, like teams of grade 8 and 9 and 10 males particularly. And if there was ever a group of youth that need some leadership, it's grade 8, 9, and 10 boys. And so what happened was on those squads, I sort of just became, well, I shouldn't say I accepted the leadership role that was in front of me, as opposed to just teaching skill acquisition and strategy. It was like, no, we're going to learn how to be men. And I'm saying men specifically, because that's the group I was working with, but I don't care what the gender composition is or the diversity. I was in a role of helping those kids learn how to live their lives in a respectful way, in a kind way, in a integrity-based way. And what I believe is that when those kids walked into the gym, they knew exactly what to expect from me in terms of what I expected of their conduct. This is how we're going to behave, especially when we're on the road visiting other places. This is how we're going to conduct ourselves. And then the coaching piece, once they had bought into the culture and tone that I set, then the coaching piece was not easy, of course, but it became much steadier and more efficient because I wasn't managing behaviors that were a bit sideways, because they knew who the leader in the room was. And even when working in the mountain bike or mountain environment with adults or youth, just that presence of leadership, I think, is helpful very much so.
Matt, any thoughts?
Yep. All coaches have to be leaders, but all leaders are not necessarily coaches. I've seen some leaders who can they can drive a crew and go somewhere, but when it comes to a one-on-one or actually developing that crew to get something done, complete garbage. They can't even communicate 3 words to make things proper, right? They just light them up and that's it. Where a coach has to be a leader, because how are you going to get someone to move forward in a positive way unless you lead them there or tell them this is the path and then direct them proper that way.
Absolutely. Shaun, round us off on this?
Yeah, well, I, to some degree, I agree with the spirit of what Matt just said. Again, to some degree, I agree with that. However, I disagree in the sense of this. I believe that the difference between a coach and a leader is a coach can do it from the sidelines. A leader does it from the front to some degree. And so coaching can be done by anyone. It can be done by your obese neighbor. But a leader is in the mix. A leader is typically there with you. Maybe not charging hard at the front, but definitely understands what you're going through physically, mentally, emotionally. Whereas a coach doesn't need to. A coach should, but they don't need to. And the reason I say that is because maybe you've seen them out there called advertisements on social media that suggest that 1 million people out there are mega coaches, though they can't tie their own shoelaces. And so coaches from the sideline are responsible to turn you into the thing that you've engaged them for. Whereas leaders, you didn't engage them. You didn't hire them to be your leader. They're simply leading, maybe as your coach. So I don't think the two are disconnected from the hip. I think they can be connected at the hip. Like myself, I'll use as an example. I was a coach and I was a leader. I was teaching people how to become world champions in 24-hour solo mountain bike racing, and I was pursuing world championship as a 24-hour solo racer myself. And so I was coaching a pile of athletes while leading, maybe not from the front because some of them were quite fast. I was leading through my actions within the arena. You can coach within the arena, but if you're not actioning within the arena, are you a leader? I don't know. That's an interesting conversation for me anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. This is, and again, one of the reasons I wanted to talk about Coaching 101 before we dive into Coaching Week was the fact that I think it's something that it's not quite understood as it should be. Let me put it that way. Now, I have a bunch of thoughts and questions on the side from the watchers here. Any other thoughts before I move on from anything we've gone over so far? Good? Okay. So right off the bat, we go Winterstorm. Good afternoon, coaches. Good afternoon, Winterstorm. Good to see you. Daniel asked the question, he says, is there an indirect/direct way of coaching? Which I think we went over already, but he says, if so, which I'm presuming there is, how do you bring about using that while dealing with the individual's reaction or lack thereof? Sarah, I'm going to come to you first. What do you think?
Well, I think that question really just feeds really well off of Shaun's last point is really just, are you trying to assume that position of leadership with that athlete, or are you really trying to coach them? I think that was like a really unique and important thing to understand, right? And I think from his experience, like that's really cool to coach, for solo mountain bike racing at that very high level and also be an athlete. And so I think when he is performing as an athlete, that's an incredibly powerful way of indirect coaching. And some people are just way more responsive to that than like the direct coaching of being on that sideline.
Steve, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question that I like a lot, because I'd like to believe that I do a lot of indirect coaching in mountain biking, just by presence, like being there with somebody. Like, if you're looking at a technical feature, or a big feature, and somebody, they need time to stand and process and look at it and assess it in their own minds. But I really enjoy the process of just standing next to somebody in those moments. And I mean, my brain is maybe a little different than other brains out there, but like, I feel like I can actually feel when they're ready to ask a question. And it's like, when you feel that that door opens, that's when you maybe just be like, how do you feel about this? Or what are you thinking about this? And give them an opportunity to guide the conversation. Because if they're emotionally sensory overloaded, like visual, even just like the sound of something can steer an athlete, or spook them, or scare them. And if you can get them to explain those things through an indirect question about it, there's that seems to work pretty well in that world. I think about myself in jiu-jitsu, like, I'm brand new to the mats, and it is like drinking from a fire hose, especially for a brain like mine. And that's what I really appreciate about my professor, is he just has this way of just being present when I'm rolling. And it's like he's drawing the question out of me by being there, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
And then when there is an opportunity to ask him a question, he's very receptive, and he knows what he needs to teach me, but he's waiting for me to come to him with it, is what I feel from him just being near us when we're rolling. And I think that's a great example of indirect as well.
Absolutely. Matt, any thoughts on this?
Um, See, I agree with Steve about that, the presence of coach, and I think that's coaching too. Like, even there's a presence, is you're there supporting them, you're keeping them accountable, you're being aware of what they're doing. That's coaching there. They have increased confidence by your presence, and that's coaching, right? What I'm drawing out from that question was, there's also facilitating a lesson or a piece of advice indirectly, as in stand and deliver, fire it out there on the interwebs. Hopefully somebody reads it, or your client, hopefully they spend it in between coffee and driving to work on their phone. That I don't like that kind of coaching, facilitating. I don't think that is just giving a lesson or teaching something. That's not coaching, right? For me, that's a hard line, where it's like, I'm not coaching you. I'll teach you this lesson, and then I'll coach you through the solution after the fact.
Shaun, thoughts?
Yeah, with what Matt was just saying, I think there's a way to teach someone something, or we'll call it coach something into someone, and then seamlessly transfer over to leading next. So as you're either explaining or demonstrating or simulating whatever the moment is that you need to impart into the person, seamlessly shift into then the leadership aspect of the moment, which is typically more open-ended conversation, or more wisdom-based, or more experiential. To use Steve's example of standing on a drop, a technical feature that someone's about to enter. Sometimes as I'm rolling up to someone in that moment, I might stop and vibe it out and see where it's going to go, and shift between coaching McCoach and leader McLeader, and hybridize that moment. Or I might just roll up to them, look at them, give them a nod, and drop straight in. Deeds, not words. And so that person then gets to consider what their next move is. And so what that requires in that moment is someone who's rolled up to a lot of people and felt it out, and someone who's rolled past a lot of people and dropped in. And over those hundreds and hundreds of moments, you get to decide what's the right thing to do with that specific person in that particular moment, based on the vibe that I'm getting, and et cetera, et cetera. So coaching isn't just a singular A plus B equals C. It is so much richer and more complex than that, if you're really, really trying to do your best for the athlete. Now, I'm not suggesting that a day one coach is not going to do their best for the athlete. All I'm suggesting is a day 1,000 coach is going to do better for the athlete, even though both parties are still trying to do their best as a coach. It takes nuance to read the moment. And if you've got a bunch of plays in your playbook then you can pull out the right play for that specific moment in real time and just know that the play that you've pulled out is the right play, not through guesswork, but through experience.
Hey, Chance, can I come back to the end of Daniel's question? I think is interesting as I was rereading it. And when you're dealing with individuals' reactions or lack thereof, I mean, I think that that's it ties together what Shaun was just saying, is that, when you see in anybody you're coaching in an explosive or emotion charged reaction to something, like I find that happens a lot mid game on a team's concept. An athlete will make a critical mistake, or there'll be a shift in momentum or something, and then there's this emotional fire in someone. That is a different response as opposed to somebody who's just gone paralysis by analysis and shut down. And I think that nuance that Shaun's mentioned a few times really becomes that critical part of a 1,000-day coach, right? Like, what is it that you're looking at? Who are you looking at as part of your squad or an individual? And then how do you respond to that? I mean, I think indirectness can definitely be useful in somebody's explosive reaction or emotional reaction. Getting somebody to come out of their shell if there's a lack of response, that's a puzzle too. It's very complex.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts on that, Sarah? No? Shaun, you got something?
I do. I just have another thought popped into my mind. It's not part of this. It's not going to be a seamless flow right into this, so my apologies. It's a bit of a angular shift here. So something that I saw a couple days ago was a football coach, and I don't track football. I couldn't name 3 football teams. But it was a football coach on a sideline, and it was a young player. I'd put him at about maybe 21, 22 years of age. I wouldn't go so far as to say it looked like a big professional game, but man, there was a lot of people there. The stadium was packed. And so I don't know what this kid had done wrong in the coach's eyes, but this coach came up to him and put him on freaking full blast. I mean, full blast, just up one side of him and down the other in an extremely disrespectful way. Didn't give the kid a chance to even blink. He just unloaded on this kid, marching up and down. He was puffing out his chest as he was doing it. He was flaring up. And you know what I saw in the moment? Was the worst coach on the planet. Just some idiot who probably was angry before he showed up at the stadium and was launching into this kid like the kid was the problem from the morning. And to me, that coach was the epitome of what's wrong with coaching nowadays. And so the reason that I raised that subject is because depending on what part of the world you're from, or depending on what sport it is, or depending on what industry we're talking about, and by coaching, it's not all athletics. It's not all riding bikes and choking people out. It's industry. It's how to sail a boat, fly a kite, how to leave home, we'll call it, as one of our sons is about to do right now. So coaching is really broad. The culture that you're raised up in as a coach is important. And as I looked at that angry man being a complete idiot, all I could think of was, who on earth let that guy turn into that? And so who that was a bunch of other coaches, was all the coaching team surrounding him who were watching it and letting it happen. It was the ownership of that team thinking that that was okay. It was the news that was capturing it in that moment and thinking that that was really awesome and we're going to publish that all across the United States of America. It was a moment that was almost being applauded by the media and all of the infrastructure to allow that to happen. If I would have been on that team in any capacity, it would have required me to probably quit on the spot, but I would have walked over to that guy, grabbed him by the scruff of his collar, tried to shake some sense into him, and then handed in my pink slip, or, you know, beat them to firing me, because I just won't stand for it, man. If we as coaches allow other coaches as either day one coaches or day 1,000 coaches disrespect to that degree, where the message that's being sent out there is you can be a complete ignoramus and still be a coach, well, that doesn't fly with me. So I'll shut that grid down anytime I see it.
Absolutely.
I'm just going to jump on that one just a little bit, right? I agree with you, Shaun, like completely. And knowing a little bit of football, there's your coaches are on the sidelines reading a book and talking to investors and stuff. And then you got the quarterback on the field leading. And right there, that's a prime example of a coach on the sideline and a leader in the field. And I would love to see that news article. Send it to me offline later if you could. And I'm going to find that quarterback, look at him, and see what he does with that player after the fact. Because I bet you dollars to donuts, he had a nice soft conversation with him and corrected him correctly.
Interesting. I wonder, and the football field is an interesting dynamic in and of itself as well. Like that style of leadership, I think, is more prevalent in that arena. From what
that's my point. Is it's a normalized. It's a normalized ignoramus. It's someone who feels that it's okay because it's been okay before him and before him and before him. It's almost a required machismo moment where you demonstrate that you're a mega coach. And I disagree. What all you're demonstrating is your ignorance, as it were.
Yeah. Sarah, you got any thoughts on that?
Man, I don't know. That's like, I'm not a football person, so but I just can't imagine. So because I coach also like on, I guess it's like considered mentoring on the corporate side, and I mean, don't get me wrong, there's definitely times where you feel such frustration in that role as like a coach and a mentor, but like on the corporate side, I would be fired immediately if I ever lost myself in such a way towards my trainee or my mentee. You know, because I just completely agree. That's such a high level of unprofessionalism. And I think maybe sometimes, like as coaches or mentors, we could feel frustrated or tempted to have an explosive response, you know, like per the question, if our athlete or our trainee seems to be unresponsive or not absorbing what we're trying to impart. But like we should have that deference as leaders and coaches in the field to be able to control ourselves and take that breath and step back. Like I just find that to be completely unacceptable behavior, no matter what realm you're coaching or mentoring in, you know, football, corporate, mountain biking, jiu-jitsu, whatever. That it's just a very inappropriate way to respond to another human being.
Yeah. Steve, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's only happened once in my coaching career, but I actually forfeited a match and walked my team out of a gym because the opposing coach was just a lunatic and was behaving so poorly, and the officials of the match were rolling their eyes and huffing and puffing and gave him a technical, and nobody in their facility, it wasn't our home gym, nobody in their facility was willing to engage with the abusive behavior of this coach. That I literally said, I'm not exposing my kids to this, and I'm not exposing youthful minds to this horrific demonstration of male behavior in particular, that I walked my team out. I just forfeited the match. It wasn't worth it for me, for those kids to be victimized that way in terms of witnessing something so poor. And I totally agree that I mean, my case in point, to personalize it, my son, very passionate about playing football. And I looked into the program that he would be able to access on the tackle side of things. And the coaching staff that was available, I talked to some parents who have worked with that coach before, and he's a screamer. And so I said, nope. I said, sorry, kiddo. We're just not going to go down that road. We'll find you another opportunity to do something you love. And found a coach on the flag football side of things that is a terrific coach. He's a good example for kids, and he's thriving playing for that team. But it was I had to do the recon first and figure out who he was going to be working with and make a decision based on that. So yeah, there's no reason to ever abuse verbally, mentally, emotionally, and certainly not physically. Like I had a Hungarian gymnastics coach that used to hit us. Like, no joke. He kept a hunk of leather in his pocket. And if our legs were bent on the high bar, he would get your legs on the way by, and that was the year I made national team. And I'll tell you what, I would never let my kids go through it. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think this is the one of the challenging parts in terms of coaching or leading or teaching or anything like that is that the I guess the standard understanding of how it works is through media, right? We see movies, we see TV, we see things like that, especially here in Canada, because we've had this conversation before about, you know, there's less of a coaching vibe here in Canada, at least. I think was what we were talking about was the fact that, there's less people being in sports being coached on a regular basis versus down in the US, right? And so I think, especially here in Canada, we see in the media, you see the military leader, the knife hand, you'll do this, the screaming, go over there, blah blah blah, do these things, and people reacting and getting them done without any of the depth of knowledge of what it takes to get to that point. I think that's one of the challenges, right? There's no depth of knowledge of how to actually get to a point where if you're in a stressful situation and I yell at you to go do something, you will go do it. More out of the fact that I just needed to be heard versus me actually tearing you a new one. Now, any other thoughts on that? I got another couple comments here, but
Yeah, I'd like to add something to what Steve said, and it was really important that he made a decision based on doing some recon of the coach that was a screamer, and by asking around. I can think of a time where I was, this would have been when our boys were about 15 years ago. We were living in Calgary, and our boys were coming up in the Nordic skiing, teaching them how to classic and skate ski. And in order to facilitate that, I started coaching Nordic so that the kids' program could be successful to some degree. And the first time that the kids started showing up, it kind of looked like this. A brand spanking new SUV would pull up, the back doors would open, the kids would get out, the back doors would close, and the vehicle would drive away. And I'm not going to say who was driving the vehicle or what they were drinking or how big their hair was, but I never got to meet them. And that was a common thing. Drive up, kids get dropped off, they drive away. I never met their parents. I just met the kids. The kids were like 5, 6 years old kind of thing. And so how can a parent understand what they want their kids to be coached by if they're not exposing themselves to coaches? Now, up here in Canada, as Chance said, it's quite a bit different than down in the United States. In the US, at least the 2 years that I lived there and understood the high school programs, understand all of the things that have to do with those 2 years of coaching that I was exposed to down there, it's a very different culture. And so kids down there get exposed to a lot of coaching, typically, as do the parents, not up here in Canada. And so the big-haired moms, the people who are dropping off their kids and then disappearing to go whatever, perhaps they had never been exposed to coaches. And so if they don't know coaching and they're not meeting me as a coach, how on earth are they encouraging their kids to better understand coaching? And so this, at least at that period of time, I saw a generation of young kids being dropped off at a bus stop, me, and then their parents dropping by an hour and a half later or 2 hours later, sometimes late, to pick up their kids. And how on earth is a kid in a good program at that point? That kid grows up. They're now the same age as my boys, which are 18 and 19 years old. And those kids that I was teaching only understand coaching through me, not through their parents. And hopefully they're better for it. But if they didn't stay in a good coaching program for the rest of those years, they're currently a generation that doesn't understand coaching. What are your thoughts?
Sarah, I'm going to come to you first. What do you think?
I think that's a really important point, right? Because then now we're going to touch on the overall responsibility that we have as coaches to really mentor our athletes or our group, right? Because so in Texas, or there's both, right? You have parents who do the drop off thing, you have parents who are really involved, and you never know what you're going to get. And right, so some of those kids, that might be the only interaction that they have with an adult that is positive. You know, we have that in our gym. We have these youth athletes who the most positive adult experience that they have, especially from a position of male leadership and what it means to be a role model in that position, comes from the men at our gym and the coaches at our gym. That is their only exposure, right? And I think as coaches, we have to understand that sometimes that we are going to shoulder that responsibility, and so it's important to really take the weight of that and understand that and conduct ourselves accordingly. But ultimately, from the coaching side, we don't know what those kids are coming from, you know, and so we also have to be gentle in the way that we approach them, because that could be the only impression that they have. And, you know, for Shaun, if that is the only exposure that they have to coaching, then that's what's going to stay with them for a long time. And that's going to give them those formative and core memories of what it means to be an adult and a leader and a coach.
Absolutely. Matt, you got thoughts?
I don't have experience with kids being dropped off for coaching because I've never coached at that level, but I do kind of mentor at school with some of the students, and you can see those individuals who don't have a close relationship with their family and stuff like that, and they really haven't had that experience of having someone behind them while they go do something. They're all on their own, or they've never been exposed to this. It is, to use one of Shaun's words, a force multiplier when it comes to actually learning a new skill. If you actually have a family behind you, it could be your coach is driving the train, but I mean, if you don't have your coal behind you, you're not going anywhere.
Yeah, 100%. Steve? Thoughts?
Yeah. One thing, when I've worked with youth teams in particular, I always host a parent meeting in the first week. And the reason I host the parent meeting is because I want to explain to the families, the adults in these kids' lives, I want to explain to them my coaching style and my coaching philosophy around things like playing time and practice schedules and commitment and all of this. And I basically get less than half attendance at the first offer, right? Like when I first schedule it. And what that does is it really gives me an important insight into the kid that I'm working with, because if their parents won't make the time to attend a parent meeting for the season of play that kid is going to be engaged in, then that opens a unique window to that kid that I can connect with, because I know they're not getting a ton of support or a ton of interest in what they care about on the home front. And that's not a judgment statement towards those parents, because I'm sure as a parent, I've blown it in a variety of ways. But if you can't make the time to be there for something like that, then that helps me understand my athletes more. In the case of my son's flag football, in Canada, I think it's important to point out too that most coaching positions are voluntary. You know, in the US, there's a lot of high school coaching positions that are paid positions, right? And there's expectation and stuff that comes with that. In Canada, we have an amazing group of volunteers that are working with kids and adults alike. And, you know, I was at Gus's flag football. I always try and get there 20 minutes before the end of practice. It's like he's at that preteen age where it embarrasses him if I'm there the whole time. So I drop him off, but then I always try and catch the last 20 minutes, and coach was wrapping up with the kids. So I just walk the field picking up the cones, because my hands are there, my feet are there. Why wouldn't I walk around and pick up the cones? Because if I don't do it, then this fellow who's volunteering, he's going to be doing it. So I just picked the cones up, and after the team debrief, they did their cheer. I just walk, hey, coach, here's the cones. And he goes, oh, he says, why did you do that? And I said, well, my hands are here and yours are busy, so why wouldn't I? Like it was very matter of fact to me, but it surprised him. And so I just think for any parents that are listening, if there's opportunities for you to get involved, even if it's being equipment manager, even if it's helping line the fields, that's all helping out the overall program and philosophy of what we're trying to do. And then if there's an opportunity to assistant coach, like, great way to learn the game. I didn't know jack about volleyball when I started teaching, but I was an assistant coach with a great mentor for a handful of years until I took a squad on myself. And those positions are all around us, and they're a really cool way to connect with kids, but you got to be willing to put your hands in.
Yeah. And I think this goes back to, you know, being a leader and being a coach, right? If you want to be involved, you got to be involved.
Yeah.
At the very root of it. One of the things I do with my boys specifically is I, for the first about 2 years of jujitsu, I was there for every class that they were in, and I would sit outside and I'd wait for them to be done. What I was doing was actually measuring how the instructors were working with the kids,
Hmm.
right? Whether they had a good class or bad class didn't matter. I just wanted to see how the instructor and relationship was with my boys, and it does really well. Now I also train there, so like I know the instructor, but I still was checking in on how he deals with the kids themselves, and he was awesome. And after about 2 years, I started to kind of step off. So I would start to drop them off, and I would start to pick them up a little bit, you know, so they had more time just on their own to kind of do it. So, but I think um, there are lots of people at the gym that I see roll up, drop the kids off, and take off, and they don't know anybody.
Yeah.
They're not part of that clan, which I think is awesome. Um, or sorry, being a part of that clan is awesome, but not being a part of that clan is not awesome. Now we're rolling up on time. I got a whole bunch of comments here, but I'm going to run through a couple of these and then we'll do some final thoughts, unless anybody has any thoughts beforehand.
It's
John?
burning and it has
Yeah,
to be
give
said.
it.
It's based on what Steve just said. It is an extremely important distinction between the United States and Canada in the sense that up here in Canada, a lot of the coaching is volunteer. And by getting a coaching title or assistant coaching title or the team equipment title, whatever it is, as a volunteer, that does not in any way, shape, or form allow you to spell leader or coach. You could be neither. You could be the furthest thing from it. You could do it worse than every kid on that field as a coach. You might be the opposite of coach and never be a good coach. And so maybe you will, maybe you won't, but there's no guarantees up here in Canada when it's volunteer based. I've seen some terribly bad advice given on all kinds of situations by well-meaning people who are ill-educated in respect to coaching or leading. I know leaders who can't lead. I know coaches who can't coach, so how on earth can a volunteer do it better than trained people, I suppose? And so as a parent, you should absolutely be showing up ahead of time. You should hang out throughout the entire time, and you should be one of the last people to leave in order to understand what your children are being surrounded by on a volunteer basis. Now, I'm not saying that volunteers are the devil. What I am saying is they're typically not good coaches and they're typically not good leaders unless they've been formally trained as such. And by formally, what I mean is either through an education system or through a process of being surrounded for years and years and years of people who are strong leaders and who are great coaches, and you somehow manage to absorb that through osmosis over a long period of time so that you can begin to impart some of the important aspects of coaching and leading.
Absolutely. Any thoughts on that before I jump into the comments? Everybody good? Okay. So I'm going to hit some of these comments. There are some really good questions here, and I'm going to save these for the week as well. So we're not going to get too deep into these, but I wanted to just show them so that we can get a kind of concept of what we're going to be getting into. So Salty Jinx kicks in with, it's one thing to know if you're the right coach for a person/team, but how do you gauge when it's your time to step out of the way or pass them on to a higher level? And I think that's a fantastic question. I'm going to save it for the rest of the week. We just don't have enough time to get into it. Cody says, sorry I'm late, running while listening to this. Good work, Cody. Keep going. Daniel Labonte, how important within the coaching realm to have an unwavering trust and commitment towards the individual and coach? Another great question. Satch Motion, good afternoon, team. Good to see you, Satch. Cody says, Shaun, this is speaking to your point of being a leader. I was watching a documentary of Special Forces selection. I seen the leader yelling at his team, telling them to pick up the boat. They were tired and struggling. I couldn't help but think that a great leader would have jumped in and grabbed a side to show his team how to do it. It would boost morale. In his opinion, this guy was acting more like a coach than a leader. So again, another thing we can engage later on. Although I think we touched on it quite a bit today. Says, sorry, I'm running while typing simultaneously. There you go. He's in the game, running and watching and typing. I like it. Daniel Labonte, Sean's point, importance of being an involved as a parent. Absolutely. He says, I know personally for me, my son's Aikido sensei has taught me as being on the sidelines while watching more than I would have thought. Oh, okay. So again, these are the things we need to think about as parents when we're putting them in with coaches for sure. Now, let's get some final thoughts on coaching 101. We've touched on a lot today. So what are your guys' closing thoughts? Matt, I'm going to come to you first. What do you think?
I think it's really, there's so much depth. Like we've just scratched the paint on this one, right? I mean, coaches can be mentors, they can be friends, they can be leaders, they can be experienced, they can be not experienced, they can be in there with you, or they can send you off on your own. So I mean, it is such a vast thing. Sean's mathematical problem there, where it's A plus B equals C. When I first got in the armed forces, there was an equation that was taught to us. It was skill plus will plus drill equals KILL, right? Keep it safe. And I've always thought of that as something very important to keep out throughout coaching, throughout learning, all that kind of stuff. Is that you can learn the stuff, you got to have the will to learn it, and then you got to keep on repeating it until you are proficient. And that includes coaching, and that includes those who are being coached.
Absolutely. Steve, some final thoughts?
Yeah, just the last 25 years of coaching for me have given me some of the best experiences I've had as a coach and leader and adult. And I just, for anybody who's coaching out there, recognize the importance of it, recognize the power that you have as a coach to shape somebody's entire scene, and really embrace it and do so with integrity. Have an integrity-based heart when you coach and work with people, and the rewards are plenty.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarah, final thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. Coaching is such a blessing in how you can touch people's lives and leave little bits of yourself with them and take little bits of them with you. But I would say the number one thing I would wish to impart is the responsibility of the athlete, and as we talked, as the parent, to research who you're seeking out as a coach, right? Don't choose what's flashy on social media or whatever your like advertisement outlet is. Like, coaches are different, their personalities and their styles are different, and not everyone is the best fit. So it is your responsibility to find the one that fits your goal.
Absolutely. Sean, final thoughts?
Yeah, it's hard to wrap this one up because I feel like we barely got it started, but that's what Coaching 101 is. So I'd say that we did okay for a 101 kind of conversation. Enough was established that we can build off it throughout the rest of the week, even though, kind of like Matt, I feel like we scratched a tiny bit of paint on this one. The responsibility, the privilege of coaching someone is best understood by doing it for long enough that you can look back and see the mark that you made on someone and the mark that they made on you. It's a two-way highway. As a coach, I feel like I've coached hundreds of people. As a coach, I feel like they coached me as I was coaching them. And that's what made me a good coach, I think, if I can call myself that, is my people that I worked with put a lot into me as well. Even if they weren't intentionally trying, just through them being part of the process of being coached, they taught me things along the way, even if they weren't trying to teach me. So for all of the coaches out there that may be still in the 101 phase, some of this stuff may be new to you, or maybe a fresh idea, we'll call it. But as you're considering that, just know that if you're in the game for a long time, you've still got a lot to learn. And if you really practice staying open-minded and absorbing as much as you can from your client as they are from you, then you'll come away maybe richer for it.
I don't know if that would be a maybe. I think you definitely will, regardless. I think that, as you guys have said, this is just the the tip of the iceberg when it comes to coaching. We're going to be spending the next 7 days talking about coaching with coaches, doing all of this stuff specifically. But I think it's really important that we spent today just discussing what it is, because it is such a large concept and it has such depth. It has an unbelievable width of knowledge that it's going to cover. So I'm really looking forward to it. Sarah, really appreciate you being on. Matt, always good to see you. I almost called you Sunday Matt, but always good to have you on here. Steve, good to have you. Shaun, great conversation. I think anybody can learn from today, and they should, because there was a ton of information that was thrown down here. And once you can actually sit down and learn from what we had today, that means you can use it to build yourself up and continue to grow into the person you're meant to be. And you can do that with us every day here on The Collective. We'll see y'all tomorrow.
Shimo.